Hey guys, so I'm over here at Faith Havens, and I was just down there a minute ago, over by the pond, and it's frozen solid, like 6 inches in some places. And so I thought I'd come over here and see how the Back to Eden garden is doing. There's a first layer, only one layer of the start of this garden. It's probably, I don't know, I'll show you. Oh, I don't know, 20 feet, something like that. But we haven't even finished the hugel mounds. And so what you'll see is the hugel mounds are solid, nice solid dirt. That's actually, it's even hard to pull it up. So then if I come over here, you know, the ground's solid, kicked around a little bit, but it's nice and solid too. So let's test out this experiment here. Okay, so we're gonna pull out the wood chips and see how our subsoils are doing. They're probably gonna be frozen too, because it's been like 30 degrees. Oh man, yeah, it's cold. It was -7 the other day. Oh man, the moisture retention of wood chips is so phenomenal that all the way down here, I'm probably 8 inches down now, there's still moisture, and it's actually beginning to I'm beginning to reach the things that are not frozen, but the water has frozen probably 4 inches down. So that's interesting. Okay, so I'm probably 9-10 inches now, and I'm still able to dig in this. It's not frozen solid, so that's a good indicator. Okay, so now if I had roots down here, imagine how insulated these roots would be. My perennial plants. Now I'm down pretty low. I think that's soil. Okay, I'm 12 inches, maybe slightly more, and I'm seeing soil. Okay, so now, if you can see, I'll stick my finger in there and pull up nice, soft mud. So the frost line in these 12 inches of wood chips went about 4 inches down. So in a Back to Eden method garden, there's two things that happen that are really beneficial above almost everything else that takes place. First thing is it keeps the soil warm in the winter and keeps it cool in the summer. So your plants have a insulation effect that combats the weather and creates a drought-proof or a environment-proof situation. Now the drought-proof side is really phenomenal, because what happens with wood chips is, where there's a lot of water on one side of a Back to Eden garden, the sponge effect of all these wood chips will actually absorb from this side and be spread out and plume out through the whole garden. It'll be equally distributed. How cool is that? To me, that's awesome. How nature balances itself that way. With this modified version of mulch, right? The forest does this by itself through fallen logs and trees and the annual leaf drop, all the other things of that nature. So we do have a modified version of us doing it by chipping, which is as close as I think, as close as we can get to the real thing, without actually going out there and scraping the topsoils of the forest itself. So those are your two things, right? So water retention that spreads throughout the whole garden and equal distribution, and then the insulation in the hot and the cold climate. So in the hot time of year, your evaporation on a soil that is exposed, like a typical agricultural farm, when they spray their water across, 90 or more % of that water is evaporated, and it's a lot. And I mean, like, a lot more. I've used 90 because that's, if you quote me, that'll be safe zone, but it's actually higher than that. It's like 97% of the water, and don't quote that. So it's just more than 90. I don't remember the exact number. That is all evaporated off. It's all lost, all of it. So in a Back to Eden garden or any mulched, as soon as you mulched, it almost completely flips. And now 90% is retained. And so now with the Back to Eden garden, we retain even more, because now we have any water that does move through and choose to drift away actually slows. And because it slows down, it has more permeation time. So it actually goes into the subsoils. So I love when I walk into someone's garden and the very first thing that I see is they mulched everything. If I walk into someone's garden or garden bed or whatever you're gardening in, and your soils are bare, the number one thing that I tell you, I won't even talk about anything else. We're covering your soil. All my consultations, the number one client issue that I find is they don't cover their soil. And the reason they don't cover their soil is typically because they like to till. And I don't till. I like a lasagna gardening method. That's how nature does it with the annual leaf drop. The science behind it is the trees will actually pull up their nutrients from the deep down subsoils, and they'll pull it up all the way into the roots of the leaves. And then from those deep roots up to the leaves, and then they drop it and they fertilize the whole forest floor. Pound for pound, leaf contains 5 times more nutrient than manure. So if you're ever composting, you compost your leaves. Your number one source of nutrient should be your leaves. When you compost leaves, it's called leaf mold. It's awesome stuff. It's incredible. And you can plant right in that. You can start your seeds right in that, or you can transplant right into that or whatever, but spread that on your garden. So that's a little bit of a side rant here, but what I'm trying to help you guys understand is the difference between a bare soil and a mulch soil all year long. I don't do cover crops. And the reason I don't do cover crops is because I don't do field grow. And even if I did, I would mulch my fields. I don't stray away from the way that nature likes to do things as much as I possibly can. So that's a lot. Because if I just don't touch it, nature will do it in nature's way. And that enables me to just sit back really and reap the benefits of what nature produces naturally with very little work. I have a little bit of a no-touch philosophy. So I will plant something, tend to something, beautify a space, and then don't touch it. And I'll see what happens. If I did my job right, there's a set of things that I'll notice. Number one is no weeds will come up. Nothing will come up except for what I grew, what I planted. And I don't use weed barriers. I have organic material weed barriers, I guess, because wood chips technically they're my weed barrier. But I don't do any kind of plastics or anything of that nature, or organic weed barrier. Like I don't do any of that. I mulch really heavy and suppress weeds, starve them of sunlight and the seeds, and then they don't spring up. Some weed seeds that are perennials will actually come up, or annuals, like oh man, what's the one that pops all over my other yard? I love it. It's an herb. It's great. I let it do it. Plantain. Plantain will come up through almost 10 inches of wood chips, which is really cool because plantain's super medicinal, and so I still get to harvest that medicine, even though I smothered out all of the noxious weeds and everything else I don't like, which is really awesome to me. Dr. Christopher said that if he could have only one herb, it would be plantain. And he's like the go-to guy for my family for herbs. Dr. Christopher's School of Natural Healing. Incredible. But anyway, side note. Okay, so as I'm doing this and I don't use weed barriers, I don't get any weeds. So that's like the dead cell away for me personally, because I don't like to be in my garden forcefully. I like to be in my garden because I like my garden, not because I'm forced to work in it. So a weedy garden to me is a lack of understanding of how nature can cooperate with us and how we can cooperate with nature. And we've skipped a step or done something wrong. If you rototill and then you leave it alone, oh man, you have thousands of weeds. It's so bad. So I lasagna garden and I don't get weeds. And I don't have to spend money on a tiller or gas. So that's cool. Or labor, break my back. None of that. So then moving on. So the next thing I see is they all need water. None of them should be hungry. Without me watering it, none of them should be thirsty. They should all be totally fine and well off. They may go through a little bit of a dip in the hot time, but there should be enough soil coverage that 100% of the water that crosses my garden is captured. None of that should leave my garden. All of it should be retained. So my plants are generally perennials because I think that the world should have done our agricultural system off of perennials. I think annual systems are perishable, fragile, and And frankly, as good as the food is, not a primary food source anymore. It's adulterated and grown in such terrible soils, nutrient depleted soils, and covered with so many different chemicals now that it's toxic to try to transplant even our annual gardens from modern seed. So I stick with perennial veggies and perennial fruits and perennial herbs, and try to feed through my garden that way, which reduces my workload and increases my nutrients. Makes sense to me, right? Okay, so then the next thing is they should never be hungry. They should never really need fertilizing. I don't fertilize my gardens, so the way that I lasagna garden sets them up right to self-fertilize. So typically the bush layers will capture the leaf drop from the surrounding trees. The surrounding trees have such deep tap roots, and other things like mullein has a really good deep tap root. It's known as a nutrient accumulator, and these will actually accumulate all those nutrients in that huge deep tap root and then bring it up into the leaves, and then every year it'll self-fertilize. They'll just chop and drop, and it'll self-fertilize right there. All those nutrients go to the topsoil where my shallow veggies are planted, like some of my root crops like garlic or carrots or anything of that nature. My other things like peppers, I really like cayenne. We have a lot of cayenne in my house, and so cayenne pepper we take in capsules and other things of that nature. But those things all have kind of shallow roots, and so, or they are a root themselves, and so we want to make sure that topsoil they're growing in is really nutrient rich. And so when those deep tap roots suck up all that nutrient, put it into the leaves, and then drop it, my topsoils are nice and fertile. Another benefit of using the wood chips and another concept behind a mulched garden is that bottom inch or two of mulch is always in a constant state of decomposition. It's composting right on top of your subsoil. You get worms that come up because they're protected and the soil stays moist and retains all that moisture, and so there's never dry or cracked or hard and the worms can't get through it. So all those microorganisms that live in the soils actually come up to the level of the soil where it meets the mulch. And what's cool is they'll actually continue. So they'll move if their soil level's here, and then you start your mulch, your worms will actually move your soil up into the mulch, and then other organisms and going back and forth will actually cause that mulch to then move into the soil. So there's like a 2 to 4 inch exchange happening on the soil surface, which is super cool because it opens up an edge. And if you understand an edge in any kind of natural ecosystem, those edges are basically where two ecosystems combine, and there's a diversity of life that exists in that edge. And oh man, in a soil, that is absolutely incredibly significant for growing herbs or veggies or perennials of any kind, or veggies that are annuals or whatever you're doing, because those organisms are what are responsible for converting nutrients into bioavailable forms that your plants will eat. Without those organisms, your plants can't even eat. They don't grow. What's funny, people don't understand, which I thought was a really cool, I didn't even know this, I'll be honest with you. It went right over my head in biology. Plants actually don't eat the nutrient you give them. The bacteria does, or the fungi does, or whatever it is that's converting it. Those organisms will actually convert it into a gaseous form and then fart it out, excuse my language, and then in that form, your plants will take it up, which is super weird to me. And there's more science behind all of that, and more description into all of those things and variations and things of that nature, right? But the concept is the same. Those organisms actually convert it into a bioavailable form. And so when you're dumping your water on there, thinking you're feeding your plant, you need to remove the idea in your head that you're fertilizing your plant. You're not. You're fertilizing your bacteria. The bacteria then fertilize your plant. How cool is that? Super strange. So then another benefit, all right, so something else that I do is if I step back and observe my garden afterward, I'll notice that if I pull back the layer, couple inches worth of wood chips or whatever I've used as a mulch, I should see white strings everywhere. And the reason I want to see that white string is actually it's a fungi. It's called mycorrhizal fungi. That mycorrhizal fungi is the teeth of the forest. In natural ecosystems, mycorrhizal fungi, like a web, like a spider web laid flat under the soil that covers the entire forest floor, connects every single root system in the forest to one central network. That network then communicates by exchanging nutrients between it all. It's like a barter and trade system for the forest. It's incredible. What happens is at the top of the hill, that where you would think naturally would be dry and really dense and hard soils, it's actually nice and fluffy up there too. Well, this is why. Because all the water that comes down the hill is captured and moved by this mycorrhizal fungi and other organisms back up to those trees. As those trees say, they send networks into or signals in and say, hey, basically I'm thirsty, or hey, I'm in need of a certain nutrients. That fungi will then trade nutrients with them to get the sugars and things that it wants. And so now there's this trade going on. So the mycorrhizal fungi will pull the water from the bottom of the hill, move it all the way up to the top of the hill, and give it to those trees at the top of the hill, and the trees at the top of the hill will give it sugars. How cool is that? It's freaking incredible. The partnership in nature blows my mind. I love it. I think it's so awesome. So when you do this in your garden, in your back to Eden style garden, or any garden where you have a good no-till method, if you till, this is gone. You don't get this benefit, period. There's no argument there. You don't have it, ever. You can't. It's not happening. So if you till, there's your cue to stop. And I don't want to say that there isn't a reason to till, but once it's an established garden, you should never ever till again, period. But then moving on from that, okay. So now in a garden where, like I just showed you, where this really rough and really quite ugly looking thing I just showed you, wait till it's done. It's gonna be absolutely incredible. But that little portion of wood chips, right, that we just explored, that is developing currently as I'm talking mycorrhizal fungi. So next spring, when I come out here, especially after good rainfalls and things of that nature, those mycorrhizal fungi will start to move through all of those wood chips. So then when I plant something in that, if I watered one side, or if the water came down good in my garden to this other side over here, and it's actually not touching the other side of there because it's on a higher slope, and I've realized, well, my no-touch philosophy says I can't bring the hose over here and water it, or a bucket or whatever, then I need to look at it and say, okay, well, what did I do? But if I establish the mycorrhizal fungi and the nutrient retention and the water dispersion and all these other things effectively, what will happen is I won't have to touch it. That plant might go through a little bit of a lull. It might go through a low, but then it will actually kick back up because as it sends that signal out saying I'm drying out, these other organisms and mycorrhizal fungi will start to move things to it and feed it and nutrient and offer it in exchange and nurture that plant. And then that plant will then produce the sugars and things that the mycorrhizal fungi want and the bacteria benefit from. And this exchange will be happening across my entire garden floor, all four corners of it. Now talking about putting in nutrients, talking about putting in, what are they called? Trees. So trees really are the bread and butter to everything. If you want an established garden to function by itself and be self-fertilizing, have good water retention, good porous soil, soft substrates, all the benefits of mulching and all these other things, you need to have fruit trees in your garden, period. It's just that simple. If you don't have trees in your garden, you are eliminating a massive portion of bioavailable nutrients and thriving ecosystems in your garden. You're dealing with a construct of man and looking at a forest or at a bare soil and trying to figure out how you can remedy issues. But if you step just a little bit over into the forest where this is all happening without you, nonstop, 100% without you, no water, no fertilizer, no tilling, none of your weeding, none of your work is going in to supplying the needs of that ecosystem. So go look at the forests closest to you and see what's going on. And you'll realize that if the trees were gone, well, it would look like this field right here, where there's no trees. That's not very lush. Guess where all the berries on this property grow? Under the trees. Guess where all the herbs grow? Under the trees. Guess where the bulk of the edible foods grow? The edge, right between the field and the canopy, where the forest edge starts, where they collide. That is where the bulk of all the food on this property natural food is growing. So as we develop Faith Havens into this permaculture property, our focus is a food forest. Our focus is developing these experiments and these things that people will be able to come and see how it works. And I'm personally going to do things different than is considered standard so that people can see the differences. So you can see how it works. You can see with your own eyes the difference. And my no-touch philosophy is really key to the whole plan, because when you start something, it can be self-balancing. But if it is not self-balancing, it becomes expensive. It becomes burdensome, it becomes a trial, it becomes a lot of other things. And so in the buffer period of startup, you can't really do a no-touch philosophy, because you do have a little bit of things that you're going to adjust, right? You are going to adjust them when you see them. But that no-touch philosophy extent basically takes you to the point where you stop, don't touch it, and you look and observe. And as you're observing your garden, you see, well, what is it doing? Is the water running around my garden or through my garden? Is my garden capturing the water, or is it just drying all up? Is most of it being evaporated? Is my mulch thick enough? Are weeds coming through my mulch? What do I need to fix? Right? What is not working to the no-touch philosophy level that I want it to be at? And is it beautiful, or is it becoming totally random and sporadic, full of weeds and disgusting briars and thorns? Right? You got to choose what you want and the level of that you accept in your ecosystem garden, in your food forest, and then implement these things that I'm talking about, and you'll start to change all of the things that you've understood about gardening prior to now. And if you want to know a little bit more about what I'm talking about, I don't remember what we changed the link to. We have a garden in in Trenton we call Lulu's Garden. It's actually a 0.87 acre urban home that has I think it's a 30 by 60 or 30 by 80 garden, something like that. It's a pretty big garden, but it's a completely back to Eden garden, completely following this process. And we've been harvesting out of that for 3 years. It's a beautiful garden. And this spring is going to blow up because we have a lot of other things that we just let self-seed every year. And this year, a ton of herbs and flowers self-seeded. So and tomatoes and things of that nature. And so those will all come back up. So this year is going to be really pretty over there. But that is an example template of what we're trying to do here. And that is so minimal compared to what we're doing here. This is going to be a much bigger, much more beautiful operation, and we're really excited to see you guys come out here and see this with your own eyes, because the things that we're conjuring in this plan are just going to blow you. It's just going to blow your mind. It's going to wow you. It's just totally going to wow you. It's wowing me thinking about it. Like the vision that we have for how beautiful this is going to be and the benefit it's going to have for the local community and over state lines is really where the bread and butter is, because our purpose isn't so that we can have a beautiful garden. It's not it at all. Our purpose is so that we can have a means of sharing and exchanging in community. It's so that we can have sustainable, regenerative community. And ultimately, the reason that we call this Faith Havens, it's actually Faith Havens Forest. When it's all said and done, it will be a forest. Is actually because it's my family's personal haven. It's our safe haven. It's our faith haven. And so we choose to take this piece of property here and develop something beautiful. And we're in partnership with some amazing individuals. I absolutely love them. I've really grown to be quite fond of them, that are doing this same thing here with us. And as we develop this and we develop the other portions of the property, each to their own purposes, each section to its own design, and each person to their own positions and stewardships and things of that nature, right? How we bracket out our whole plan here, you're all going to have ability to participate in one way or another. We're going to echo this back to you. We're not just doing this for gain and for self so that we can hang out alone in our forest over here and disconnect from the world. It's totally the opposite. We want to show you what it's like to stand in a forest that provides everything that you need. We want to show you what it's like to have community where your kids can run out the back door and you not be afraid that they're going to walk into your neighbor's house and hear, excuse my language, but verbal porn, which is considered music today. It's not music. It's not music, it's verbal porn. It's disgusting. And the things that the kids are listening to and talking about, the movies, the ads, there are so many things that people are just desensitized to. And we're creating this community and this environment where our kids can run outside and we don't need to wonder what our neighbors are doing, because we're all kind of sharing this like-mindedness in the sense of personal development and spiritual maturity. And we seek to be connected to nature. We seek to be united in a sense of self-sufficiency, right? So we support each other. We support you. We support all around us and the environments around us. I come from so many different backgrounds. All of us come from different backgrounds. And so when we really kind of put our heads together, we have a lot to contribute and to create together. And so I'm really looking forward to talking to you guys more about the details of what we're doing here. But I hope that I showed you something today that can influence your thinking for this coming season, because this is when it starts. I mean, this is it. This is gardening now, right? It's already started. Gardening doesn't start in the spring. It starts in the winter. It doesn't start in 2 months, and it doesn't start March or April. It started in December, in November, right? The planning, the seed collecting, the gathering. Get your seeds before everybody else does in the spring. Get your plan. Contact me if you need a companion planting chart. Contact me if you want to know what to do to get this going on your own property. These wood chips, particularly these wood chips, did cost me money because I had to have them delivered by a truck because I didn't have a trailer of my own at the time that I had them delivered. The trailer was booked up with something else. But our Back to Eden style garden that's 30 by 60 in Lulu Street is completely 12 inches of wood chips from top to bottom. And every single one of them was free. Not a dollar, not a penny from me. None. Not a penny from anybody. It was given to us because arborists, I'll give you the tip right now, in your local area, you need to call your local arborist and tell them, hey, I have a property located here. I want you to come dump your wood chip load on my lot over here. And they'll be like, oh, okay. Because guess what happens? They actually have to pay to get rid of it at the landfill. And the landfill just gives it away or sells it or turns it into compost or something of that nature, right? And so they just dump it right on your property. It saves them the trip, the time out of their day, their time on their payroll, and it saves them the expense of paying for it. So you're doing them a huge service by opening your property for them to dump those chips on. And you can call every arborist around you to find one that will do it. And sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. Sometimes you'll wait a long period and then you won't hear back from them. And then all of a sudden you'll walk outside and there's a huge pile of wood chips. You're like, where the heck did that come from? I guess I got to clear my schedule and move that this week. So, I mean, that's the nature of the beast. But, oh man, once you get those things, everything I just told you will open up to you. And you do need to do a thick layer. And judge that according to your climate and your zone. Out here we have so much weeds and it's so much moisture that I do 12 inches to capture as much of that as possible and to suppress as many weeds as possible. Our Back to Eden style garden in Lulu Street has no weeds. There is one particular thing that seeds every year like the plague, and it's actually a tree that drops. It's an elm tree that drops these little spiraling seeds all over the garden, and those things are relentless, man. They seed everywhere. I could take the tree out and I would solve that problem, but then I would defeat the purpose of the leaf drop and the ecosystem and all these other things, right? And so I don't have, the way that you need to start changing your thinking is I don't have a elm tree problem. I have a lack of ecosystem problem, right? There's an element in my ecosystem, and I actually haven't figured this one out yet. I haven't figured out the method to suppress that. Maybe it's a net. Maybe I capture at that particular time of year, maybe I capture the seeds in a net. I don't know, right? I haven't put a lot of thought into that yet. But that's the way you need to think about it, right? There was a story I just heard yesterday. A guy had a dam, created a pond, and then he dumped, he created the dam and had extended the pond. And then one day he was walking around out on the property a year later, so something of that nature. And in the middle of the field, there was this like fountain just spewing water out in the middle of the field. They're like, what's going on? So they run over there and they're sticking their hands in it, trying to shove their hands down into the hole to like stop it. And they could tell it was coming from the dam. And there's like this leak had busted out the bottom. And they were like, what's going on? what they had discovered after they figured it out was that it was actually not a gopher that burrowed a hole all their network underneath inside that dam, and then eventually the pond leached into that whole network, and the pressure just shot it up on the other side of the dam. And their neighbors were coming to them like, oh, I'm so sorry, you lost all your water. Wow, man, that's terrible. And they turned around and they said, no, that is not terrible. Can you imagine how much moisture we just got shoved into that network, into the subsoils of my property? Do you know how rich and nutrient rich that is going to be in the coming months? Because they plant on the backside of it. In all of our permaculture design, we plant everywhere that we can, right? And so you have like a bamboo, for example, on the back of dams. You've got something going on to sure it up so that it's not just dirt, right? We let nature run its course, and we have a network of roots tying that grid together. And they benefit us at the same time by either being a medicine or a food, or a nutrient accumulator, or whatever we want it to be, right? And so when they saw this and they saw, can you imagine how big that gopher's network was underneath there? And then all of a sudden now it's filled with water, and now all those trees and everything else, man, I bet they exploded the next year. So you could look at it like you have a gopher problem, or you could look at it like you had a hydration problem on that side of your dam, but you don't anymore. So just change your thinking, be positive, think about things in a different perspective, and you'll realize that on this beautiful earth, this big blue rock, we have every single thing that we need to thrive and stay alive and be abundant and prosperous. And let 2022 be your prosperity year. Trust the process. Trust the journey. Just experiment. Just go crazy. Do something you've never done before and see what happens. I bet you will be shocked.